Hello. Yes, that is correct. So, neural networks are basically something like you can imagine what scientists back 15, 20 years back what they tried to imagine how the human brain works. So, the human brain is obviously still something which a lot of research is going into, but what people imagine of how a human brain works, that's what they have tried to simulate or emulate in neural networks. So neural networks consist of what you mentioned, three major layers, which is the input, then the yeah, and then the output layer. So all these are connected through neurons. So the neuron is simply what we imagine that the brain is also a bunch of neurons which are connected together and where there is some input going on through our senses and then the processing happens in the neurons and then there's a output which happens. So the same thing is happening on a neural network. Till around 10 years back, people thought that the largest neural networks could be where the number of neurons were, let's say, in the millions, low millions, or maybe around 5 to 10 million. And that is the maximum size of a neural network that you can build and train and use. So after that, there were like limitations to computing and limitations to the amount of data that is required to train those networks. So people thought that it was not possible to build any larger networks than that. What LLMs did and how they changed the entire thinking is that people, so there was this discovery that after a certain large size, when you go to a much larger model or a much larger size of neurons in the network, you actually get much better performance. So that is how LLMs came into being. They are nothing but very, very large neural networks. And how they trained it is that they gave it the entire internet data that is available. Everything that is available on the internet was used to train these networks. So you can imagine a large language model to be nothing but the entire information that is available on the internet in one place. And like you mentioned, that there's an input and there's an output. Similarly, in the LLM, the input that goes in is a stream of words and it processes that. It tries to look for that information or similar or related information inside the model and then it gives an output. So there is nothing magical about it. It is simply that these are very, very large, very compute intensive. Like a lot of computation happens every time you input a string of words into a model. And all that computation gives you the output of something which is already available on the internet, which was used to train that model. So when you are talking about, so when you are talking about LLMs, you have to keep in mind that this basically the power comes from this huge amount of information that has been used to train it. So obviously it knows a lot. But when I say that it knows a lot, it doesn't mean that it understands. So there is a very big difference between understanding something and knowing something. So if the LLM knows something, like it knows a fact, and you ask a question about that fact, it will be able to answer and give you the output correctly. But if you ask them something which they haven't seen before, the data is not there, or they haven't been trained on that data, and you try to ask them to infer something from that, that is something which LLMs are not capable of. They are not capable of coming up with new ideas. So that is where that comes into picture. So LLMs have typically been trained to give some output. They can't say no. Like there were almost 3 years back, most of the LLMs that used to ask them they would have any idea because they were trained 2 years back. But they were still giving some kind of because LLM it is just a predictive model or machine. It is trying to predict that this is the question. What is the answer? If it is a completely factual question which is not in the database, then it will give a completely wrong answer. So all these are limitations of these models, these technologies, which you should be very
careful about when you are using it. So, in this presentation, I will try to see that this presentation is a link of a video that we are doing a relatively long video, but I would suggest or strongly recommend that you watch that video. It is that video has been recorded by one of the founders of OpenAI. So he knows what he's talking about, and he explains in very great detail how LLMs work, how you can use them, what are the limitations. So to understand that, it will be very helpful to you. So now coming to the actual uses of AI as a technology, there are obviously a lot of different opinions, but as the technology has evolved in the last 5 years, most of the people have realized one thing, that you cannot do without technology, without AI in the next 5 years. Whatever you do, whichever field you're in, whichever industry you're in, it will be impacted by the use of AI in the next 5 years. There is no ways about it. The only thing is how much of an impact it will be on, and how the roles will change, or how the work will change because of the implementation of AI in that particular industry. So if you specifically talk about coding, or if you talk about programming, there are very large companies like Facebook and all, where their CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg and people of that level have said that in the next 5 years, 80% of the software code